Well, welcome everybody. For those who haven't met me before, I'm Joshua. I'm a co-conspirator of Claudius's, and Claudius, Michel and I lived together in a shared house for many years, and it was over one of Claudius's holistic barbecues that the Holos Earth Project was formed. And I just wanted to say, first of all, happy birthday, Claudius. And it's also another birthday because it's a kind of year since the Holos project has been going, and we've had some amazingly interesting talks. And today we're going to have another one from the master himself. And I'm just going to hand over to you, Claudius, to explain what we're going to hear about today.
Thank you very much, Joshua. So I think I'm going to go straight into my share screen, and then we'll talk into that. So it's an honor to have so many of my friends and our friends in the Holos Project from around the world be with us this evening. And the topic I know of holism, meaning and reality, is one that has engaged philosophers and scientists through the ages. It's a very deep topic, and it might seem presumptuous for somebody like me to even want to begin to address this topic. And yet when I thought about it deeply, I thought this isn't a nice to have. This isn't a clever intellectual exercise. At this era of change, somebody was saying it's an era of change. Another person has said it's a change of era. And I think it's right. In this change of era, it's a must-have. One way or another, all of us are invited to make sense of the world that we co-create, that we generate. And at this time, so many of the folks that I know have really struggled, have really had a rough time. We feel particularly blessed sitting up on the mountain here, somehow away from it all, and yet connected through internet. But there are many people that have been right in the thick of it, have had the loss of loved ones, have been ill themselves, have experienced the disruptions of climate change. I know folks in the United States of America where the villages around them have disappeared in fires. So we find ourselves in this amazingly challenging era that invites us to find a way to be in it. And so the topic of holism, meaning and reality, how we engage with that, seems to be particularly germane at this time. On your screen, you will be seeing a painting by Van Gogh. And I really only came to discover Van Gogh deeply by a program that was distributed on YouTube, where in Amsterdam, they had this virtual reality studio where you walked through Van Gogh's paintings. And of course, they were playing that beautiful song, Starry, Starry Night, in tribute to his magnificent works of art. And so it is through virtual reality that I really came to a deeper discovery of Van Gogh's magnificent art. But what it says to me as an amateur is that what you can see there is his understanding of energy, his understanding of dynamics, his understanding of process, his sense of immediacy in the world that he was trying to capture through the medium of his art. And so that really put a frame for me when thinking about this issue of meaning and reality and the role that holism can play in it. And when I reflect on this, I go back to Zimbabwe, where I was visiting the Matopo Hills in southern Zimbabwe. And I first found Bushman painting, San people painting 25,000 years old. And it struck me that at that time, these San people were already able to see an image, code it somehow in their own internal awareness, and replicate that onto the rock face. They were actually already doing what Korzybski tells us, is that we are mapping to the territory. we're creating an internal representation, an own representation of the territory. And our own representations will correlate with that of others and be informed by that of others until eventually we have some sort of a broadly consensual meaning of reality. And that's our challenge today, is to find that deep consensual meaning of reality. I'm also aware that 250,000 years ago, a little crevice in the Great Victoria Falls on the mighty Zambezi River started forming. And now that little crevice is about 150 meters deep after 250,000 years. So that maybe in the next couple of million years, there will be a new Victoria Fall completely, and I'm sure it won't be called Victoria Falls anymore. The name of the river in the local language is Inyami Nyami, the spirit of the mighty river, Inyami Nyami. And so there is an abiding there-ness of activity going on. That river has been there for a long, long time, and it's going to be there for a long, long time. But even so, it's not a stationary thing. It is an ongoing event. And so that also gives me a perspective that there is that which is, it is process, it's not stationary. And maybe our challenge is that, my challenge is that I've photographed these events and made them stationary. Maybe I'm taking a photograph instead of living in an ongoing movie. And maybe that's the big challenge to humankind at this time. So reality then, I'm wanting to explore as dynamical change, as process, as evolution. And then I want to suggest that that evolution is the theme that is bringing things together in our own awareness in the holistic process. So that the creation of wholes is our human meaning-making process. Hence holism, meaning and reality. So I'm going to be trying to explore this through the lenses of three different, let me see why I won't move my screen. There we go. Through the lenses of three Leo thinkers who were born on this day, the 26th of July. George Bernard Shaw, and what we'll see from his comments is that he promotes self-creation through robust engagement with the prevailing context. His message is get out there, get in there, engage, shape, create. That's his message. Very robustly, very aggressively. If we look at Carl Gustav Jung, he's advocating self-realization through the inner journey of individuation. He says that getting in there part is actually quite an immature process. He says when we get into the deeper aspects of human maturation, we're going inward. And in the going inward, we are getting engaged with that which has informed that creative process all along. And that's the way he guides it. And then we go to James Lovelock. And he's really interesting because after promoting this deeply respectful engagement with Gaia, a reverential engagement with Gaia, he now advocates a much more collaborative engagement with AI-driven technology. So we've got these three very interesting perspectives, and this is going to be a very humble attempt to see whether we can integrate their views into a holistic perspective. I want to mention, let me just go back. I want to mention one woman that I discovered this morning, whose birthday was also the 26th of July, and her name is Rosalind Franklin. She was born in 1920. And having discovered her this morning, I'm sorry it took me so long because I could have introduced her more fully. But she had some amazing work to do with the early discovery of DNA. And much of the Nobel Prize winning work that followed after Rosalind Franklin was actually based on the foundational work that she had done. So there is a woman to celebrate on this day, the 26th of July. So let's go to this George Bernard Shaw. And there's his comment. He was born in 1856. He died in 1950 at the age of 94. And he was a very provocative man. And he said, life isn't about finding yourself. Life is about creating yourself. That's an interesting challenge. And so at his time, the technology was really advanced railways. The Industrial Revolution was well underway. Mechanics were becoming really applied with steam engines driving them. And in that Industrial Revolution, he was really becoming aware of the human condition, of what had happened to humanity in the course of that Industrial Revolution. And his whole response was, don't let your identity be determined by those conditions. Go and change them. Don't be a victim of the status quo. Go change it. That was his whole theme. And so if we then take a look at some of his statements, he says progress is impossible without change. And those who cannot change their minds cannot change anything. And so he has this deep insight into a flexibility of approach, into adaptiveness, into mental agility. And it is that mental agility that enables us not only to engage with the dynamical process, but to actually engage procreatively with it, to engage generatively with it. And then he warns us, he says that stubbornness swallows up everything, and anyone that doesn't evolve, doesn't change, and progress with space and time. And so he's seeing this whole principle of extension, not only spatially, but he sees the evolutionary process already, evolving, changing, processing with time. And so we can already get hints of the holistic perspective there. And then he suggests that everyone is guilty of that stubbornness from time to time, being closed-minded. And I guess the case that I'm going to be exploring briefly is that our stubbornness in this era is that we've gotten ourselves trapped in a materialistic viewpoint. And it's about time that we change our mind about that materialistic viewpoint. He's very provocative. I want to move your faces off the screen so that I can see my own. Oops, I've lost me. I'm back. So I can see my own screen. It's okay. He says a life making mistakes is more useful than a life spent doing nothing. So he embraces the notion that we can't get it right all the time. But get out there and do something. And of course, learn from your mistakes. The reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, he says all progress depends on the unreasonable man. Go out there and engage is the message. Don't be reasonable. Don't refuse to rock the boat. Damn it, rock the boat, he says. And then he gets even more acerbic when he says people are always blaming their circumstances for what they are. I don't believe in circumstances. The people who get on in this world are the people who get up and look for the circumstances they want. And if they can't find them, make them. So what I find in Shaw is that he's already engaging with reality as a malleable here and now, not a fixed there-ness, but as a malleable, dynamical milieu in which we can engage and in which we can create the conditions that are ideal and optimal for ourselves. And that remains his message. I want to turn to the role of art. And in the Holos project now, we have been thinking about art as the 8th generative theme. Particularly because it seems as if the artist, like for example, the painting that we looked at, it's offering us a deeper insight into reality. It's offering us an insight into the dynamics behind the apparency. That picture of Van Gogh particularly, it's offering us an experience of a deeper, evolving, fluid, flowing, energetic dynamic. And it seems to me that that art is talking to the right brain. The art is actually opening up a whole new field of experience that can't be processed when we apply simple logics to it. And I want to just open that topic briefly, because when we start looking at a future digital age, a future AI age, it seems that in art and in right brain experience, there is something precious that we've got to hold on to very dearly. So, for example, George Bernard Shaw says, without art, the crudeness of reality would make the world, there's a typo there, my apologies, would make the world unbearable. Without art, reality in its rough state would be unbearable. But then he says something very interesting. He says, you use a glass mirror to see your face. You use works of art to see your soul. And so he's touching into something even deeper there. He's touching into something, when we start looking at Jung in a moment, into a deeper dimension of who we are, other than this apparency, this physical apparency of us in our physical form and our physical activities in the here and now. In a way, without putting his finger on it, he's talking into the deeper spiritual dimensions of human being. So, of course, for Shaw, his medium, he started off trying to be a writer, a novel writer. He was a failure. But his medium was drama. And so his creative engagement with the world was not through politics necessarily, and he had a go at that, but he got very frustrated with politicians. His creative engagement was through the medium of drama, bringing powerful, inspirational, challenging messages through his medium of drama. And he had some very strong exchanges with Winston Churchill. So, for example, he wrote to Winston Churchill, he said, I'm enclosing 2 tickets to the first night of my new play. Bring a friend if you have one. And Churchill wrote back and said, cannot possibly attend the first night, will attend the second if there is one. So that was his medium, was his artistic expression. And there was a feeling, and Jung goes there as well, that the artist is there to co-create reality with us, help interpret reality, help give us deeper insights into reality. By the way, just as we're looking at it, that painting of Churchill, he hated absolutely. That painting was one that he wanted destroyed as soon as he could, because it showed a vulnerable person, not this heroic, battle-worn prime minister. So this was Shaw's conclusion then. He said, there is the true joy to be used by a purpose recognized by yourself as a mighty one, to be thoroughly worn out before being thrown on the scrap heap, to be a force of nature. In his play, Man and Superman, Shaw develops a theme that humankind evolves through natural selection towards Superman. Humankind is on its way to an even greater and greater expression of humankind through natural selection. So he engages with that whole evolutionary principle. And then he says that the prime mover in selection is woman, the life force. It is woman that is doing the selection of how humankind evolves to its greater potential. And then he says it very specifically. He says that humankind is the milieu for creative evolution. So his message is a challenging one. And when we have a conversation around this shortly, we're going to be looking to say, what of what Shaw has challenged us with do we find helpful? Do we find meaningful? Do we find useful? let's now move to the other person who shares this birth date of the 26th of July, and that is Carl Jung. Now, technology in his time was already quite advanced. When he was born in 1875, electric motors were already working. Of course, the internal combustion engine hasn't developed yet. The age of oil and fossil fuel hadn't come upon us yet. We were still in the age of steam and the age of electric engines. And then, of course, his history is one where, as a psychiatrist, he came to a major break with Sigmund Freud. And it was about the role of the unconscious, a fundamental different perspective of the unconscious. For Sigmund Freud, broadly speaking, the unconscious was unruly and had to be controlled by the conscious. For Jung, the unconscious was the source of depth, the source of self, the source of connection with the much deeper dimensions of being, inviting us to embrace it and discover ourselves in it. Now, as I talk about this topic of Jung, I am so relevant of the wonderful presentation that we had by Marcus Link on the whole notion of the alchemy of wholeness, where he looked at the Jungian approach and he drew correlations between Carl Jung's view and Jan Smuts's holistic view. And so I'm not going to go into depth in this. I'm discovering this as I even speak to you. But of course, for Jung, it was about the symbolic reality of the human creature, the symbols that we create, the archetypes that we are working with, the frames of reference that we are working with, the shared collective icons that we are working with. And he says we try to find our existence by making a philosophy out of those, to find a way back into a world in which we no longer feel a stranger. Now, I want to just benchmark that, in which we no longer feel a stranger, because we're about to enter a new era, which we'll be looking at shortly, in which we might feel very strange. We might feel strangers. But he makes this critical statement. He says, to the critical intelligence, nothing is left of absolute reality. It doesn't exist an absolute reality. And then he says that the underlying primary psychic reality is so inconceivably complex that it can be grasped only at the farthest reach of intuition, and then but very dimly. That's why it needs symbols. And so, of course, Jung's message is that through our collective sharing of language, of descriptions, of symbols, of archetypes, of legends, of stories, of religions, of belief frames, we are actually creating a space, a home for ourselves, a psychic home for ourselves. But if that psychic home for ourselves can be informed by the deeper unconscious, then it can be an even better psychic home for ourselves, and we'll discover an even deeper dimension of who we are. So he says, far from being a material world, this is a psychic world, which allows us to make only indirect and hypothetical inferences about the real nature of matter. The psychic alone has immediate reality, and this includes all forms of the psychic, even the unreal ideas and thoughts which refer to nothing external. We may call that imagination or delusion, but it does not detract in any way from their effectiveness. And so when I think about this at a very simplistic level, I sometimes watch our dog. And our dog is sleeping on the floor, and then we'll start making running movements. In the sleep, the feet are twitching, and there are little squeaks. And I'm aware that the dog is dreaming. And the fact that the dog is having an experience is that dog's reality in that experience. Even though from me, the external observer, it's a sleeping dog. In dog's experience, there's something completely different going on. And then I'm aware in my own life that when I've woken up out of a dream And often in the dream, I've realized that I'm dreaming. It doesn't detract from my heart thumping, maybe breaking out in a sweat. My whole physical being is responding to the psychic experience. And then I'm aware that at one stage when I was doing a firewalk, conducting a firewalk, and it was a very, very difficult firewalk with a very, very reluctant participants. It took a lot of work to get them psyched up so that they could actually do the walk. And all of them walked over the bed of hot coals comfortably. And then I was totally exhausted and they said, now let's see you do it. And in my head, I said, I'm too tired. I made a very fatal error. I said, I'm too tired, but let me do it anyway. And I burned. I burned on the very coals that my students had walked over without burning. And so from a typical physical science perspective, that doesn't make sense. But that was the reality. And so it invites us to begin to rethink what is real, to rethink that. And that is why in this rethink, we can go back to Jung, who said we are living in what the Greeks called the right time for a metamorphosis of the gods. That is, of the fundamental principles and symbols. This peculiarity of our time, which is not of our conscious choosing, he says, is the expression of the unconscious man within us who is changing. So at the deeper dimensions of humanity, there is an emergent process. Something is emerging, something is in a creative process even now. And you and I are riding on the surface of that deeper emotion, of that deeper emergent process. And then he suggests to us that coming generations will have to take account of this momentum of transformation if humanity is not to destroy itself through the might of its own technology and science. There is a very powerful warning there. And my dog is trying to open the door. You see, he's actually very clever. He's actually jumped up there and he's got the handle of the door in his teeth. Something's emerging in the dog as well. And Michelle is looking after him. So Jung is inviting us into a dimension of understanding reality, which is a non-material space. The material manifestation is something that we are pulling out of it by the sounds of it. And then he says, and I think this is very germane and very pertinent to our time, he says, be grateful for your difficulties and challenges, for they hold blessings. In fact, man needs difficulties. They are necessary for healthy personal growth, individuation, and self-actualization. If we contextualize that statement in the conditions of today, in the conditions of a pandemic, in the conditions of radical climate change. I just had a conversation with people in Johannesburg who said it's been the coldest morning in 60 years in Johannesburg. We coming up the hill yesterday at 36 degrees, coming up the mountain where it's supposed to be cooler. If we then contextualize this era, that statement in this era of pandemic, of climate change, of dramatic changes to the workplace, and of this pending new era of technology, then it invites us to create an attitude that engages with this, that rather that tries to resist it, that shapes it rather than try to just go with it or avoid it. And I'm so aware that being up on the mountainside here, with Shantina just up the hill, further up the hill, it seems so far away. And yet here we are connected in this most amazing way through this most amazing tool of Zoom. There's such enormous benefits in what technology can bring to actually perpetuating the holistic cause. And then we come to Jung's conceptualization of the importance of art. And I love this picture of of Van Gogh, self-portrait of Van Gogh. Just a little anecdote, my father did when he was studying art. He tried to paint that same self-portrait of Van Gogh. And he gave it to me and he said, hang on to that. He said, it might be worth something someday. I love my father's optimism. So here's Jung. Art is a kind of innate drive that seizes a human being and makes him its instrument. The artisan is not a person endowed with free will who seeks his own ends, but one who allows art to realize its purpose through him. As a human being, he may have moods and a will and personal aims, but as an artist, he is man in a higher sense, collective man, one who carries and shapes the unconscious, psychic forms of mankind. And as I look on the screen there, I see the face of some people I know, and some of them are poets and poetesses. And I celebrate the artist. But what we're seeing then is, as we create reality, the very art that we are creating is informing reality, is informing the process of holism. Which brings us to the most provocative, in my experience, hypothesis that we are confronted with. And this is that of James Lovelock. He was born in 1919. He's living now at the age of 102. Michelle and I had the glorious pleasure of being at his 100th birthday party at Exeter University, when he just published his latest book, The Novacene. And he was interviewed, and he was lucid. His memory was excellent. And his greatest pride and joy at that time was the fact that on the lunar, on the Martian rover, this little creature that's crawling around on the surface of Mars, his technology is digging in the soil to assess the stuff in the soil there. So a formidable scientist with a formidable quality of consciousness. Indeed, a deeply holistic quality of consciousness. So at his time when he was born, Eddington was already proving correct Einstein's general theory of relativity. That's over 100 years ago. We already had such advanced notions in science. He was born in the era of the Spanish flu, 100 years ago. And he really is taking us into the next chapter, and that is this chapter of virtual reality. But let's go to these two phases that he's somehow trying to reconcile. Firstly, he says, nature favors those organisms which leave the environment in a better shape for their progeny to survive. Now, in his book, The Revenge of Gaia, he says that if we human beings don't get our act together very quickly, nature will sort us out. Nature will sort us out if we don't get our act together very quickly. That correlates to the statement that he just made here. Let me just move my photographs of you. His argument in the Gaia hypothesis is that the entire range of living matter on Earth, from whales to viruses and from oaks to algae, could be regarded as constituting a single living entity capable of maintaining the Earth's atmosphere to suit its overall needs and endowed with faculties and powers far beyond those of its constituent parts. Here we get the holistic perspective. That's it in its essence. There is the whole is much greater than the sum of the parts. And there is a quality of knowledge, of knowing, of intellect, of intelligence, of consciousness that exists, that embraces all of those and makes meaning of all of those. And so if we look at this statement of his, Bear in mind Jung's argument that it is through the unconscious and the collective unconscious that we can actually access those faculties and powers that Lovelock is referring to. So he considers the whole planet to be a self-regulating living system. And he suggests that in this age, which is the Anthropocene, where the human footprint has been the most impactful on the planet, is going to be shortly replaced by the Novacene, where artificial intelligence and robotics, he calls them cyborgs, will become the dominant factor. So he says that those cyborgs will regard us with the curiosity with which we now currently regard growing plants. Oh, look what these humans are doing. This is an interesting species. It's an interesting observation about what humans are doing. But he says that nevertheless, the ecological health of Gaia will remain key to this fundamental evolutionary technological emergence. He's suggesting that artificial intelligence will need more or less the same temperature range and more or less the same conditions that we need in order for it to survive. And that thing brings him to the next statement, where he says this. He says, we are the intelligent elite amongst animal life on Earth, whatever our mistakes. It needs us, Earth needs us. This may seem an odd statement after all that I've said about the way 20th century humans became almost a planetary disease organism. But it has taken Earth 2.5 billion years to evolve an animal that can think and communicate its thoughts. If we become extinct, she has little chance of evolving another. So from Lovelock's perspective, it is uncertain and probably even improbable that there is another intelligent life form elsewhere in the cosmos. Given the Goldilocks conditions of the first minutes of Big Bang, etc., he says that those conditions, it's been miraculous that we've come to this place in this period of time. It's unlikely that it's happened anywhere else. Maybe it has, he says, but it is so special. Gaia is so special. We are so special that we've got to reverence this at all costs in the whole evolutionary process itself. But he says, artificial intelligence, the Novacene, is going to be an agent to support us in that. And so that really is a challenging notion. I have recently become exposed to some of the deeper dimensions of virtual reality. Astonishing capacities that are now available, astonishing technology, where as we discover life, we can actually go into our very bloodstream in virtual reality. We can go into the heart in virtual reality. We can go into the depths of the oceans. We can go into the outreaches of space. What we can imagine, we can replicate in a way that we can now experience in virtual reality. Back in 2017, when I was very graced to be invited to a major conference of Nobel Prize-winning scientists in Norway, I had the opportunity to experience virtual reality for the first time. And so you put on this little device and you were up in this kind of hot air balloon. And then there was like a little walking plank, an unstable walking plank, and you were invited to step out onto this unstable walking plank over this vast chasm with a wonderful fjord down below. And in my rational mind, I was saying, I'm standing on solid ground. I'm standing on solid ground. In my rational mind, all of my reason said, I'm standing on solid ground. But my body wouldn't move. my whole visceral response to that artificial reality was, this is reality. And so it seems to suggest that we've got to escape this physical dimension in order to know the coming reality. And we've got to understand that it is the way we make meaning of it through our imagination, through our frames of reference, through the way we map it. And we've got to evolve, as Jung was suggesting, the very archetypal symbols and principles. They do for a fundamental review of how we engage in what is coming and what can be if we employ that generatively and creatively. I'm aware that I've gone over time, so I'm just going to summarize with a statement by James Lovelock, where he says, the one thing that being a scientist has taught me is that you can never be certain about anything. You never know the truth. You can only approach it and hope to get a bit nearer for it each time. You iterate towards the truth. You don't know it. We approximate reality. We sort of find the consensus we can on reality. But we are challenged to how are we doing that? So from the holistic perspective, we are participants in creative evolution. That co-creation can be informed by the immature ego, go out and conquer, or the mature self. Roger Brooke, who is a Jungian analyst, said the shift now is from heroic conquest to reverent embrace. Through our symbolic frames and principles, we bring energy to form through engagement with that flux of existence. Engagement with our own human struggles enables the transformation of the ego through individuation to self. And here's the great joy. We can be informed by the deeper wisdom in the unconscious to be agents of holistic creation. And then a final statement by my mentor, Jan Smuts, who says, 1941 he wrote this. He said, I do not believe that we human creatures are the acme of the universe. I believe that much greater forms of spiritual wholes will develop than those we see before us now. And so with that, I'm going to hand you back to Joshua, and we'll go into a conversation. There we go.
Yes, there we are. Thank you, Claudius. That's marvelous, fascinating and challenging. We just thought we'd have a simple question for the breakout rooms, which is simply from these three perspectives and three challenges, what invites you to engage more deeply? From these three perspectives and three challenges, what invites you to engage more deeply? Just share that within your groups, and then when we come back, we'll have another conversation. If you can suggest someone from your group to summarize some of the things that you've spoken about.
Or questions, Joshua.
Sorry?
Or questions.
Or questions, thank you.
Questions. And then please, if I can just also just chip in here, this is not about being wise or clever or informed. This is about how we can begin to articulate our own experience, even our concerns about this world that we're going into. It's just a way in which we can collaborate about finding meaning. Over back to you, Joshua, back to Nick.
Very good. So Nick, can you transport us magically to our breakout rooms and our magical mystery tour to find out who our conversation partners are going to be? So do you want to guide us through this last part? Okay,
so I must say that we had the most stimulating conversation in our group. I was fortunate to share with a few very, very interesting women. All of them I know well. It was just absolutely delightful, provocative. So maybe the opportunity we have now is just to share, somebody from your group, just share that question of the integration of Lovelock's view of this burgeoning new creature with Jung's view, with Shaw's view, any insights that seem to be significant from your group. And what I'm going to invite us to do then is just stick up your hand when you're ready to go. Just stick up your hand, and between Nick and Joshua, they'll keep a check on that. And maybe I'll invite somebody from our group just to open the space. Ying, will you open the space?
Sure, I'm happy to. Given that we only have about 10 minutes left, I'll try to be really quick. Yes, we started with talking about the Novacene and how it can bring up a lot of fear. And I talked about the concept of the uncanny valley, that we have sort of this deep innate biological dread of something that approximates humans, but is different. And the sadness potentially of sort of merging with a different form as well. But then we also talked a lot about how creativity helps us essentially to step into the chasm, into this unknowable future, and how it is not into falling into nothing, but a rearrangement of the patterns, which is a phrase I really love, and sort of trusting that new patterns would emerge. And I also shared how I was really touched by the deep optimism coming from Claudius and the thinkers that he cited, and how that is a choice, and to have this sort of position of integration at the same time of the disbursement of the energy and sort of potential chaos happening is I feel a main theme of holism and of the groups that I encounter here. I'll stop here, but anyone feel free to add.
So just pop up your hands. Thank you. Christian, unmute.
Yes, hi there. Since Ying just mentioned something, I thought I jump straight in, because it might add very nicely to what Ying just said about your group. We basically talked about back and forth, but something that is still resonating with me is the fact that I don't know who it said in our group, but it was something along the lines that we need the exchange, and we need to talk with each other and accept each other in order to cultivate an holistic approach, in order to understand what holism really means. Generating holism on our own is not working as far as we were concerned, and it's simply because of every one of us is living in a bubble, and those bubbles have some overlaps, and it doesn't make sense to put them on top of each other in order to generate 100% overlap. It's those differences that generate more than just the pieces that we are made out of it. So that's what I wanted to add. Please feel free to add if I missed something.
Thank you. Just put up your hand.
You're muted, Frederick.
Thank you. Yeah, I was with Christian in the group, and it came to me towards the end of our discussion, that there is a great paradox that I think that we experience, and that is a paradox that is so beautifully expressed in the concept of Ubuntu. I am my own individual bubble, where I put boundaries around me. I've got a name, I've got a surname, I've got a whatever, but the Ubuntu says, because we are. So, and I think that is the secret of finding yourself in others, meaning that you are prepared to become vulnerable and step out of your stuckness about who I am. And I think that is perhaps the big challenge in the Western world at the moment, that we got stuck in our own ways, and we believe the wholeness is if everybody can agree with us, then we will have the wholeness that we're looking for. But I think that is really false consciousness.
Thank you, Frederick.
Shortly, I was in the same group as Christian and Frederick, and from the picture with the bubbles, that comes into my mind. I see these bubbles of consciousness as interacting bubbles. So we could interact for the relation of art. For instance, with the pictures of Van Gogh, he was in his own reality bubble, but we could widen our view by his pictures, and we could interact with this reality bubble and form like a bigger, wholer bubble. And I see as a picture of our group, our discussion group, that we together formed resonating bubbles that build up a bigger bubble that could resonate with the outer reality. That was the picture that comes into my mind, and I would want to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. Diana, would you like to share, because you were in our group and you had something fascinating to share? Very cool.
Yes, I think building up on this idea of ripples, these bubbles, I think our take on inner and outer was somehow looking at the environment and working on the environment, creating in it this technology, this amazing things that we have kept on building throughout our civilization. And then we have the inner development that we are still a work in progress, maybe more underdeveloped than what we are capable of creating outside. But what got us thinking was, how does our purpose look like? And is it consistent to our goal of self-realization, maybe becoming better? And I think the challenge of perceiving things holistically is perhaps more concretely this idea on how does the future look like? Will we become cyborgs? We will merge with technology, or we will be spiritually evolved and transcend to a higher plane, let's say? Or is it both? Because if it's both, it means that we are maybe more ready to think holistically rather than contradict ourselves and sort of get stuck in our own conflicts. So yeah, I guess that's roughly.
We had a very interesting conversation in group 5. Touched up many angles which maybe I'm not able to summarize in a few words, but the key was the Nova scene, and is there a space for and aesthetics and within the Nova scene, within, let's say, in a world where the evolution of artificial intelligence is the key motor of, or we considered like factors of scale, like things working globally or things working like locally, and considers factors of time or speed, like the speed of evolution of our technology compared to the speed of evolution of our spiritual growing. We consider aspect of like, what's the motor of change? What's the motor of evolution? What's the motor of wholeness realizing? And the sense, common, the consensus was just the notion of ethics, that we should do it. It's not enough. Doesn't seem to be that human beings work that way. It seems like contacting a place of, we called it joyful revolution. It's like a spark of joy that can move things in the direction of the good, and many more things. Then I'll stop here.
I think the one thing that's a really good, I was on group 5 as well, and it was a good summary. I think the thing that we left it with, meaning unresolved completely, is the issue of power. How does power interplay with all of these other optimistic perspectives?
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I comment here? I cannot say that I'm an expert on power, but when people crave power, I often wonder if they are not full of fear, because if fear is driving them to somehow protect themselves against everybody else and make themselves more and more remote and then have control over everyone else, then what is it that they are perhaps, what is the underlying motive for this? Yes, I mean, people enjoy having power, they like having money, they like being in charge. But if people are more inclusive, and if you look through history, the kinds of people that were more inclusive didn't seem to need so much material stuff. I mean, we don't have to go as far as being St. Francis of Assisi, but I mean, just as an example, like he seems to have given away everything he had and is fairly happy just embracing nature and living without all the wealth he could have had because his family was very wealthy. So that's just one of many examples, but it's as if we won't need so much power if we are connected to one another, because we will have a collective energy and power, and then we're able to trade what it is we might need with the other person if there's more embracing going on and less, you know, fighting, or less, you know, control or trying to take power or hold power or keep, you know, it's all fluid. I mean, it's a bit like trying to keep Mercury, you know how Mercury runs and breaks into thousands of pieces. It's almost an impossible element to actually keep any control over. But it has extraordinary power, and we don't need ourselves, I think, to be all this holding on. It's as if the holding on makes us smaller and more rigid and less able to have the kind of power that we seek, that we want, or that we have even. We don't seem to notice this power. I don't think I'm just imagining it.
Thank you.
Any more contributions?
Yes, can be like a group 2 now.
Yeah.
Or there's somebody from the group 5 that still would like to say something.
Go, Sandra.
Yeah, okay. Fred, help me here, okay? We were discussing, Fred, he was asking about the missing piece probably that is happening. And Marlene was talking about the phrase that we are not here, just the Bernard Shaw that said, or a human being, as a human being, or we are not here to find ourselves, but create ourselves. And then my talk, my view on that, it is as a holistic, with a holistic view, is not, this is duality. So it's not about finding myself or creating myself, it's both. As we go in the process to find ourselves, we start creating ourselves and we start creating our reality. As we go through who am I, and start asking these questions, where I came from, where I'm going to do after, with transition, because I don't believe in death. So in this process, we also create ourselves and we create our reality. And then was the reason I said for him, actually, the missing part, probably that Fred was asking, I said, probably is the super conscious mind. We are talking now through our conscious mind. But when we remember something, we are bringing from the subconscious mind. And what I call the superconscious mind would be like something related to soul, but not from the religious point of view, but the spirituality. For me, they are different. So we come from the source, you know, and we have this connection with the source. But as we come to earth, we forget, and we live in a society that's so conscious minded, you know. And by the way, conscious mind is just 10% of our behaviors, because 90% comes from the subconscious mind. So we forgot this connection, and all the creativity, it is related to this connection. This is, you can talk with any scientist, with any artist. They say, it was not me. I was inspired by something. You know, they all say that. It's exactly that connection that we are probably missing or forgetting that makes the sense. Then I said, why is important us to talking about this here today? Why we are doing this? Not just to give some intellectual talk. That is really nice. This is very pleasant. I learned a lot today. As I'm delighted with this group. But the point is, energy. We are all energy, comes from the source. Energy can't be destroyed, just transformed. So as we talk here, we are creating like a bubble of energy. And this kind of bubble energy is helping us to evolve in terms of consciousness. And then I remember that I mentioned the 100th monk theory, you know, the monkey washing the potatoes. So as we start talking more with this group and bringing more ideas and questions, and because I told Fred, I don't see that there's right or wrong. Everything is valid. We have choice, we have free will. So there are no mistakes, just lessons. If we destroy ourselves, we destroy ourselves. It was free will. If we decide to evolve, you are going to evolve. But as we talk and we have more groups like this, we have more conversation like this, we are creating an aura, we are creating an energy, a field of energy that is helping to transform the human consciousness. Because this is our purpose now. The same way we have a quantum leap when the man invented the wheel, you know, or they discovered the fire. We, with the technology we have today, we are going through a new quantum leap of consciousness. And we are facing the same way, like a few decades ago, we were facing like the atomic bomb. Oh, we are going to destroy humanity. You know, but we're still here. Maybe technology can help us to evolve in terms of consciousness. Maybe not. It's like technology is like money. It's not good or bad. It depends what you do with that. You can do great things with that. You can do terrible things with that. It's all about free will, you know. So in my point of view, that was my explanation. Fred, please add something else there. And Marlene too, if she's here.
I don't have anything to add. I would like to ask a question, hoping that Claudius will have an answer for us. The first two holistic thinkers, Shaw and Jung, encourage us to realize ourselves. But in the case of Lovelock, is he saying that somehow humans are deterministically programmed to develop so that the Novocene is inevitable, or does human agency have something to do with it? In other words, are we able to spoil this vision of holistic outcomes by intervening in such a way with the capacity to destroy the human species?
It's a hard one to come to grips with, Fred. And I'm struggling with that, because on the one hand, his view of the Novocene was that there is a transcendent intelligence in Gaia herself. And he said, his words were, it would be the ultimate hubris if we as human beings thought we could actually model how Gaia does herself. It would be the ultimate hubris, he said. And so on the one hand, he is projecting this amazing, intelligent entity that is much greater than our consciousness can even conceptualize. But on the other hand, he's now looked at this emergence of artificial intelligence, and he's starting to say, because it is able to integrate so many amazing data points, way beyond what we are able to integrate, it's able to integrate so fast. And all of those data points will be able to create information and be self-tested for their veracity, that this new creature is going to be able to do the job of understanding Gaia better than we will understand it. But what he's saying, and this is like a kind of a sop to you and I, he says Gaia will need us, because we will need to actually maintain Gaia. Artificial intelligence will need it. We will need to have to maintain the conditions in which this new cyborg will actually be able to function. So there's almost an ambiguity between the view that it will regard us as plants, but useful plants. So I'm struggling with that one. And to that extent, I struggle with Lovelock. But at the same time, I really welcome the profound challenge that is presented to us to actually begin to put our minds to this thing that we want to shape. And as I address that, I'm thinking of Mary Shelley's book, Frankenstein. Frankenstein wanted to become a human. But in the rejection of enabling Frankenstein to become a human, Frankenstein became a monster. And so there's already a prescience in Mary Shelley's book that invites us to say, and it's been eloquently expressed here, it's all about pattern formation, pattern creation, pattern perpetuation. It invites us to embrace enthusiastically our capacity to shape day by day what is emerging. But there is an ambiguity with Lovelock, which seems to separate what he's saying from a deeper, visceral, human being that both Jung and Shaw are proposing in their different ways. But it's a good question. And by the way, we're going to be looking at this question again on the 9th of August in a dialogue session. What is the future of artificial intelligence? I'll be sending out that information with somebody that is a very deep expert on artificial intelligence. That's happening on the 9th of August, 9th of August. I'll send out that information. Thank you for that, Fred. What are your own thoughts, Fred? You're muted.
Well, I think that humans have the capacity to destroy our species. Therefore, we're not deterministically shaped to go on to some higher existence. What concerns me, though, is what is the driving force, the animating force in the human experience? We've heard, and it is the accounts by Bernard Shaw and Jung are delicious, obviously, one can't argue with them. But what animates human beings to evolve in the way they have? Are we deterministically motivated by the natural environment, by nature? Personally, I don't think so. In that case, agency is with humans, and we hold our fate in our own hands. And if there is to be any evolution, yes, Lovelock is correct. We have to act as stewards for nature, but I don't think nature's going to come to our rescue if we make some bad decisions. And this is where I think that we do have to be guided by standards of what is right or wrong, good or bad. But my view may be in the minority. So that's what I'm listening to the rest of you to try and establish. just how far can humans evolve from this point where we actually do have the capacity to destroy humanity on this planet?
And so I thank you so much for that contribution there, Fred. I've just had a little note in the chat box there from Ed Olson, who's just in the process of publishing a book on consciousness. It's a beautiful book, I've read it. And also to say that in the generative themes of the Holos project, making technology work for the evolution of human becoming is a key theme that we'll be exploring very deeply going forward. We're really just scratching the surface. I thank you so much for indulging me in being able to go there and for the richness of these contributions. I've loved it. And I'm so aware that we've now run way beyond our time. So all that I really want to say is please stay with us. We're going to be exploring this question as we go forward. We'll be sending out the information of how we'll explore that. We've got some wonderful authorities that's going to be talking to this. And we're going to be including the whole notion of art and ethics and aesthetics. And I say them almost in the same breath, art, aesthetics, ethics, because I think they're one and the same expression. And we're going to be exploring what is the whole making capacity that this artistic thing in us, that Jung says it's not our ego that does it, it's something that's rising through us from a deeper becoming in humankind. You spoke about that, Sandra. So I've really enjoyed the depth and breadth of our conversation. We've skimmed the surface really, but that's why the Holos project exists, so we can begin this exploration. And I'm just going to open the floor to anybody that wants to make a closing statement for us. Anyone? And there's no rush.
I think we should all sing happy birthday together. It's going to be California, but what about unmuting and singing to you?
Great, Julia.
Yeah, great.
Happy birthday
to you.
Happy
birthday
to
you.
Happy
birthday, dear
Claudius.
Happy birthday
to
Laughing in wholeness, I think.
Thank you, Claudius. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for all of your holistic intelligence.
And watch this space. Thank you. Okay.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye then.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye. Bye.